Welcome, everyone. This is the first of a six-part series on the splendor of Rome. In this series, I will explore the meaning of Christian pilgrimage and its relation to Rome as the seat of Holy Mother Church. 2025 is a Jubilee year, and it's a call to go on pilgrimage. But what is a pilgrimage? Well, we're going to talk about that in this series as well. We will dive into Rome's early history as I show you the Roman ruins and the streets that St. Peter and St. Paul would have walked on. Did you know you can see those streets today, those old Roman streets? Some of the stones even have visible divots from the Roman chariot wheels. They're actually down here by the Colosseum. Speaking of the Colosseum right here, well, it was built in 80 AD, and it only took 10 years to build, but it was on the backs of slaves and prisoners of war. The money came from the spoils taken from the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, 70 AD. You know what? Let's go over to the Arch of Titus. I'm going to show you this because they have some proof of this in stone. So here's the arch in back of me. So the Arch of Titus, Titus was the emperor during the time. That's why it's named after him. So depicted in stone here is the triumph of looting. Here you can see the menorah. They carried it off from Jerusalem in 70 AD, melted it down. Voila, you have the money there. So let's head back over to the Colosseum. What else am I going to cover in this series? Well, let me take a sip first. I'm going to talk about Christian art and architecture and how it developed through time. I will show you some images of the early Christians depicted in their new faith and their understanding of who Jesus Christ is. I will talk about the Christian martyrs and the saints and where they're buried in Rome. We will peel across the layers of Rome's history that can be seen today. But first, let us get a view of this beautiful city. We're going to come across the Colosseum. It's a ruin today, but in its heyday, this amphitheater would have been covered in marble and could seat 60,000 people. It even had an awning on top to keep the important people from suffering in the scorching sun. Gladiator fights, animal hunts, sadly executions as well, but even sea battles happen there. Yes, they flooded the thing to have ship battles. Today it's a tourist attraction, but on Good Friday, traditionally the Holy Father leads the Stations of the Cross here. Next, you can see we're looking at the Basilica of Maxentius. Nope, this is not a church basilica, but the ruins of a Roman building used for official government business of the emperor. But as you can see from the design of it, it does look like it could have been an old church. We'll learn more about that in a later episode. Next, you see the Victor Emmanuel Monument. It was built to honor the first king of a unified Italy in 1885. It's also the site of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Next, we're going to the Tiber Island. Did you know there's an island in the middle of Rome? Yep. In 998 AD, a church was built over a Roman temple here, and the relics of St. Bartholomew were brought here to this church, which now bears its name. His relics are under the altar in an urn. Now you see the Lateran complex, the Cathedral of St. John Lateran. Did you know the popes lived here until 1309, when Pope Clement V moved the papacy to Avignon, France? Yeah, the Romans weren't too happy. The French were very happy, but that's why St. John Lateran is the Pope's cathedral, not St. Peter's Basilica. The popes did move back, though. Finally, the jewel of them all, St. Peter's Basilica. The cornerstone for this church, built on top of the old church, was laid in 1506, and the construction lasted 84 years. Could you imagine a construction project these days lasting 84 years? Ugh. The dome is the tallest in the world, a beacon to all the faithful who come to Rome. See the arms, they're outstretched to gather in her children into her bosom, Holy Mother Church. These arms are also made in the shape of a keyhole. Jesus gave Peter the keys to the kingdom. And down the street, we see Castle San Angelo. It was originally built as a tomb to the Emperor Hadrian, but then later came a fortress for the popes. There's actually a wall that goes between the castle and the basilica, and the popes would go through there for safety because Rome was under attack. Next, you can see we traveled to the Piazza di Popolo. This means the Square of the People. It's the northern gate where almost all visitors and pilgrims would have arrived through. Next, the Spanish Steps. It's the area of the Spanish embassy. That's where these get their name. And finally, the Trevi Fountain, the ever-popular fountain, made famous by the movie Three Coins in a Fountain. You throw a coin in, and it means you're coming back to Rome someday. The money does go to charity, so it is for a good cause. So let's go back to, what is pilgrimage? Pilgrimage is simply a journey we make to go closer to God. The history of pilgrimage starts with the Jews in the Old Testament. They would make a pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. The temple was the physical place of the dwelling of God. Now, if you remember your Bible stories, Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt to the Promised Land, but it was God who they followed in a cloud called the glory cloud. When the glory cloud rested, so did the people. When the glory cloud moved, so did the people, until they got to the Promised Land. That's modern-day Israel. And a temple was built for God by King Solomon. So the dwelling place of God was the temple in Jerusalem. However, the people were turning away from God and following false idols, so the glory cloud left the temple. Since the temple was the last known dwelling place of God here on earth, it was still considered holy and sacred, and sacrifices were offered there in atonement for sins. Let's take a look at the next slide here. Inside the main structure, over here, okay, it was the Holy of Holies. This was the most sacred part, and inside was kept the Ark of the Covenant. Remember Raiders of the Lost Ark? Yep, that one. And inside the Ark was the 10 Commandments, the Aaron's rod, and some manna collected from the desert. The Jews were called to make a pilgrimage there 3 times a year. And part of the requirements consisted in performing various acts or rituals, such as participating in a ritual meal and offering a sacrifice in atonement for sins. But as Christians, we know that God returned to the temple, don't we? God returns to the temple when Mary carries baby Jesus up the steps into the temple. He is the God-man, the light of the world. This is in the presentation of our Lord. Also, Mary is the new temple and the tabernacle where God dwelled. This is why we have so many churches named after her. She's the first church. This image next to me is by a 14th century Italian painter named Giotto. It's found in the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi in Assisi. So we stand there in the lower church. We stand and marvel at how Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to the Lord's house while we're standing in the Lord's house. Assisi, by the way, is a very easy trip from Rome. I highly recommend it. Did you know that the term Jubilee also comes from the Old Testament? Back in the time of Moses, a law was given to the people of God that prescribed a special year called a Jubilee year. It included a list of forgiveness of sins. It included a list of things to be done: slaves set free, land given back, and forgiveness of debt. In the Christian era, the Jubilee year shows up again in the Middle Ages at the turn of the 1300s. Pope Boniface here was the Pope at the time. The city of Rome was fastly becoming a popular place of pilgrimage. The Holy Land was becoming increasingly dangerous to travel to, so the next best thing was to go and venerate the tombs of Peter and Paul. So in 1299, there were a lot of pilgrims coming into Rome, and Pope Boniface took notice. Word on the street was that they were expecting a special indulgence from the Pope, especially because it was the turn of the century. So Pope Boniface declared the first Jubilee of 1300, and he gave the pilgrims a set of prescribed actions to bring them back to a holy way of living. He opened the spiritual treasury of the church and granted a plenary indulgence to those pilgrims who came to Rome, attended Holy Mass, went to confession, prayed for the Pope, and venerated the tombs of St. Peter and St. Paul. This started the tradition of the Jubilee years being called by popes for every 25 years now. So let's take a look at this fresco over here. It's left from the old decor of the old St. John Lateran. That church used to be covered in frescoes, actually, before it was baroqued in the 1600s. But this is Pope Boniface VIII declaring the first Jubilee year. You can see this as you walk right into the basilica on the right side, just as you walk in the door behind a giant statue of St. Matthew. It's on the pillar behind that. Let's go on. So, holy doors. By 1400, the tradition of walking through the holy door was introduced. The holy door is a symbolic door to walk through to begin anew. Jesus Christ is the door. You enter through him to leave the secular behind and enter the holy. It's a call for conversion and a call for forgiveness. It's kind of like making a New Year's resolution, but this is a spiritual resolution, and Holy Mother Church attaches indulgences to this, which is the power of grace to aid us. There's a holy door in each of the 4 major basilicas in Rome, which is opened only during a Jubilee year. Otherwise, the door is locked or even boarded up, like the one at St. Peter's. This is the door at St. Peter's the last time it was opened for a Jubilee year. You can see the hand of Christ on the door. It's turned shiny gold from all the people who've been touching it on their way in. It's like he holds your hand and you enter into his heart as you walk through the doorway. You may ask, what is an indulgence? Well, the definition is a temporal removal of punishment due to sins. The classic example we use is if you throw a rock and break a window. You can say you're sorry, but the house is still damaged with a broken window. And that's what sin does to us. But someone comes along and pays for the window and fixes it for you. That's the Lord. And that is the gift he gives you through his church in a plenary indulgence. Now you have to be detached from all sin. Perhaps that's a little harder. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. All right, let's go back to pilgrimage. You know, pilgrimage is when we leave our comfortable dwellings to travel to holy places only to encounter him more intimately. Certainly a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, to walk in the footsteps of Christ, is foremost the most desired place for a Christian to go, isn't it? But it's not always possible. We know that. So we go to other places that are important to the life of a Christian, such as Rome. The early Christians traveled to Rome. They left their comfortable dwellings and traveled for months to get to Rome. And where did they go? They wanted to go to the burial spots of Saints Peter and St. Paul, and especially the early Christian martyrs. So let me grab my oil lamp here. Let me light it, because guess what? We're going to be going down into the catacombs, into the darkness. Here we are, going down into the catacombs. Oh, guess I don't need my oil lamp anymore. They have electricity. Oh, well. Yeah, they do have electricity down there. But in the early church, it was pitch black, and they brought their oil lamps down there. They actually used to bury the people in the different niches. You can see one over here and then also over here. In fact, here is a slab they would put over the different tombs, right? In fact, the early Christians spent a lot of time down in the catacombs, not only to venerate, but to decorate. Yes, the earliest known images come out of the catacombs that we know of for the Christians. They would paint these symbols on walls of the tombs, and in some cases, wealthy families have a whole room of Christian images and decorations. I'm going to show you one famous image from the catacombs, and that would be our image of Our Lady. It's from the 3rd century, and it's the oldest we have that we know of. See, you can see here, if I move my head this way, there she is. She is holding baby Jesus, and the prophet Balaam is next to her, pointing to a star. That comes from the scriptures. Yep, that's the oldest known image, and you can find that in the catacombs of Priscilla. Let's climb out of the darkness of the catacombs and into the light. Yes, it's much better now. I like the light. I want to talk to you a little bit about desire. Deep within every person is a desire for God, and God has placed that desire in our own human hearts. We have a desire to know truth, to do the good, and to experience beauty, because God is truth, goodness, and beauty. What a better way to experience truth, goodness, and beauty than on pilgrimage? So hopefully you will join me again on pilgrimage for part 2 of this series. We are going to roam around the Roman ruins and step back in time to see the first couple of centuries of Rome, to see those places associated with St. Peter and St. Paul. So, see you next time.